Welcome to this explainer. Today we're doing something a little bit different. We're going to take Arundhati Roy's absolute masterpiece, The God of Small Things, and demystify it. We're treating this celebrated novel not just as a piece of literature, but as a complex, incredibly engineered building. We're going to examine its blueprints, walk through its halls, and figure out exactly how its foundations were laid. But before we can even begin to appreciate the architecture of this book, we have to address the giant elephant in the room. Its deeply, deeply divided reception. Because, this is one of those books that people either completely worship or they walk away from in sheer frustration.
Just imagine cracking open a book and getting two completely opposite reactions. On one hand, you've got readers who are praising the masterful prose, calling the experience lush and gorgeous. To them, it's this immersive, magical journey into 1969 India. But then, on the flip side, you have highly frustrated readers calling the exact same book disjointed and a giant gray mess. And why? Well, it almost always comes down to its incredibly confusing, non-linear timeline. So our goal today is to treat that confusing timeline not as a flaw, but as a mystery box that we get to unlock.
And the numbers really back up this massive divide. If we look at the data from over 335,000 reviewers on Goodreads, the split is honestly fascinating. About 70% of readers give it 4 or 5 stars. They absolutely champion its emotional depth and lyrical style. But there is a very vocal minority sitting right there in the lower tiers who just couldn't penetrate the narrative structure. They're constantly asking, did something actually happen? Why are we skipping around so much? Well, the answer to that actually lies in the very deliberate design of the story.
To solve this mystery, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with this polarizing modern classic, move into the architecture of memory, unpack trauma and frozen time, examine the politics of small things, and finally explore the legacy of unsaid things.
Section 1. A polarizing modern classic. So here is a really surprising fact that changes how you read this entire book. Arundhati Roy actually trained at the New Delhi School of Architecture before she ever became a novelist and an activist. That disjointed timeline? It's not some editing mistake, it's a meticulous blueprint. Roy herself has actually said that her architectural training kicked in heavily when she was structuring this narrative. She designed the story of these twins, Estha and Rahel in Kerala, the exact same way an architect designs a building. Every door, every window, every structural component has an aesthetic, stylistic integrity. If you pull just one piece out, the whole thing crashes down.
Section 2. The architecture of memory. Okay, so psychologists use something called the connectionist model of memory. Think about it like this. Your mind is in a neat little filing cabinet where you just pull out one perfectly organized memory folder at a time. Not at all. It operates way more like a spider web. Memories form these wildly tangled neural networks. When you tug on just one tiny fiber of a spider web, the whole thing vibrates, right? That's what happens here. When a traumatized mind tries to retrieve one piece of information, it inadvertently pulls up a dozen other interconnected memories. A sudden smell of smoke, a fleeting look, a mother's marble eyes. The narrative of this book perfectly mimics that psychological reality.
In literary circles, there's this concept of fabula, which is basically the raw chronological material of a story, versus the sujet, which is how the author actually chooses to organize it. And Roy, she completely abandons the clock. Instead, she creates a spatial practice of memory. The timeline jumps violently between 1969, specifically those 13 fateful days in IMNM leading to the tragic deaths of Sophie Moll and Velutha, and the year 1993, when Rahel returns home to find her twin brother Estha completely mute. The story just circles these traumatic hubs like a deranged spinning top, because ultimately that is exactly how traumatized characters experience their own history.
Section 3. Trauma and frozen time.
Now, when we look a bit closer at the psychology of trauma, it is essentially defined as an overwhelming, catastrophic experience that forces the mind into delayed, repetitive loops. And for Rahel and Estha, time basically becomes frozen. They are perpetually living with the ghosts of their past. They can't just move forward smoothly like other children do. Their memories literally refuse to let them live in the present. They just continuously trigger past agonies.
And honestly, when you stack up the devastating maltreatment these children endure, it is completely overwhelming. It starts with the divorce of their parents, leaving them denied basic love and care. Then, they face the constant emotional blackmail of their great-aunt, baby Kuchama. They have to endure the horrific drowning of their English cousin Sophie Moll. And then, most devastatingly of all, they are manipulated and forced by the police to falsely betray their beloved friend Velutha, a betrayal that directly leads to his death. Right after that, the twins are separated for 23 agonizing years. This total, absolute destruction of their innocence leads Estha to lapse into silence. He quite literally rubs out his own surname in his notebook, writing unknown, Estepapin unknown, as he just retreats entirely from a world that has only ever shown him cruelty.
Which brings us to a vital contrast in the text. This is really the fulcrum of the entire novel. The narrative revolves around two deeply intertwined deaths. First, you have the drowning of the English cousin, which the book constantly capitalizes as the loss of Sophie Mole. It's publicly mourned, it's privileged, it's heavily commemorated. But hiding right behind it, lurking in the quiet shadows, is what the novel calls the terror. And that is the violent, entirely unremarked police murder of Voluta, an untouchable carpenter. Voluta's death is completely obscured and unacknowledged by society. Yet, for the twins, every single mention of Sophie's death inevitably dredges up the agonizing memory of Voluta's murder. They simply cannot uncouple the two.
Section 4. Politics of Small Things. Let's zoom out a bit, because the entire tragedy of this novel is actually set into motion by something called the love laws. These are the unwritten, incredibly rigid social constructs of India that dictate who should be loved, and how much, and how long. The forbidden affair between the twins' upper caste mother, Amu, and the untouchable carpenter, Voluta, is a direct, fatal rebellion against these oppressive caste systems. By daring to break those love laws, they trigger this catastrophic chain reaction from a society that is absolutely terrified of losing its established power dynamics.
Now, this deep focus on private, localized struggles actually sparks a massive academic debate surrounding the book. On one side, you have theorist Frederick Jameson, who famously argued that Third World literature must always be read as a national allegory, meaning a private destiny is really just a stand-in for the public national struggle. But on the other side, scholars like Aizaz Ahmad heavily critique this as a totally reductive categorization. Impartially speaking, Roy brilliantly challenges this binary altogether. She elevates the intimate, quote-unquote, small stories of marginalized people, and she demands that they receive the massive commemoration usually reserved for sweeping national histories.
Section 5. Legacy of Unsaid Things. This quote right here reminds us exactly why this intricate narrative matters so much. Through her architectural timeline, Roy forces us, the readers, to experience the tangled, inescapable web of memory exactly the way her traumatized characters do. We are submerged in this world where the big things, the trauma, the caste violence, the political oppression, they all lurk silently in the background, dictating every single aspect of life. Meanwhile, the characters are only able to navigate the small things on the surface. That fragmented structure we talked about, it isn't there to confuse us. It's there to make us feel the paralyzing weight of a past that simply refuses to stay buried.
And so we arrive at the end of our structural tour. Arundhati Roy has built a space where we are forced to grapple with history, memory, and trauma, all at the exact same time. She leaves us looking at the blueprint of these lives, pondering one final, really profound question. Are we simply the helpless victims of history's massive forces, the big things? Or, in the end, is it the intimate, momentary, small things of love and connection that truly define and save us? Think about that as you reflect on the architecture of your own memories. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the structures around you.